We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words, guys, are taken from this beautiful document that lays before you. This is your Declaration of Independence. Now, while originally voted for on July 2nd, 1776, it would actually go into signature phase on July 4th, 1776. That's why we celebrate Independence Day every year on July 4th. This document was so important during this time period that when George Washington presented this in the city of New York and it was read aloud, that the crowds began to riot, and it ended with the pulling down of King George's statue in the town square. This document is of such high value to our nation and our people that it actually resides, one of several copies in fact, in what's known as the Charters of Freedom Rotunda in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It sits with the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights in titanium encased glass filled with argon, which is actually a non-reactive or non-flammable gas. If anyone were to attempt to hurt or take these documents, the cases actually sink into the floor of the rotunda and the doorway gets locked off. This one document is what sparks America into its official fight for independence against King George III. And so today's lesson is going to be taking a very deep look at what actually is said in our Declaration of Independence, so that you, as American citizens and residents, can understand why this document holds so much value to us as a nation. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the Declaration of Independence. Now, this big idea of declaring independence for America was not something that the colonists came up with on their own. If you remember, during our last unit, we talked heavily about the Enlightenment philosophers and this time period, this age of enlightenment that occurred in Europe, where people came up with ideas of freedom and reasoning and logic and independence and equality. Well, by 1776, understand that the colonials were very much fed up with a lot of what England was doing toward them, in essence, treating them like small children. And so the spirit of independence exploded in 1776. Now, a lot of this was actually sort of motivated, if you will, by Thomas Paine, who wrote a pamphlet, so not a full book, but a small few-page booklet known as Common Sense in January of 1776. And this proved to be an enormous influence in many of the colonies, to the extent, guys, that people would pass copies of Common Sense to each other just to get the word out about why the colonies deserve to be independent from Mother England. Now, the Declaration of Independence itself has quite an interesting history. The Continental Congress, which was essentially the group of Americans who came together to discuss this idea of independence, chose to put together a committee. Now, at the head of this committee was a young congressman by the name of Thomas Jefferson. He was a lawyer, he was very well educated, and so he was chosen to help draft our Declaration of Independence. Now, Jefferson drew many of his ideas from various Enlightenment writers, but one who had a huge influence on him was John Locke, where John Locke wrote that essentially all people are born with specific natural rights, and these include the natural right to life, to liberty, and to property. When we actually look at the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson gave it his own little spin when he says that all men are entitled to certain unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I guess during colonial America, the idea of property and pursuit of happiness were kind of the same thing. Now, on July 4th, 1776, Congress finally approves and starts to sign the Declaration of Independence. Now, on this document are 56 signatures total, of which one, John Hancock's, is so large that it's actually been rumored that he stated that he wished it to be large enough that King George III could read it without his glasses. So essentially saying that he was going to put his mark on this paper, and he wanted to make sure that the king knew it was him, John John Hancock that had actually signed it. Now, what you need to know about the Declaration before you actually dive into this activity is that our Declaration of Independence can actually be divided into 4 major sections: the preamble, our Declaration of Natural Rights, our list of grievances, and finally the Resolution of Independence. Now, each part serves to tell the king a different aspect of our message. The preamble is essentially the introduction, and it basically says that those who wish to be independent should by all means state their reasons for this, as in, we're going to go ahead and break up with you, England, but we feel it's only right that we tell you why. Now, our Declaration of Natural Rights physically lists all the rights that they believe that the citizens of this new country should be entitled to. Now, what's kind of interesting is this is followed by a portion of the Declaration of Independence, guys. And when I tell you that this portion takes up about 2/3 of the document, that's no lie. Our list of grievances is essentially our complaint section to the King of England and the British government. And it lists everything that we have been angry about: the quartering of soldiers, the additional taxes, the lack of representation, you name it, Jefferson and his committee put it in there. And finally, we have our Resolution of Independence, where in this last statement, we say this document essentially declares us now as free and independent states, that we no longer are the colonies of Great Britain, but are in fact now the United States of America.